Yeah, well, Paul, we'd been trying to get Paul McCartney for many years when we did the Monterey film, because obviously Paul had he played a role in Jimmy getting that gig at Monterey. And Paul is really busy. The guy doesn't sit around. He's working all the time. If he's not recording, he's promoting his album and he's doing shows or he's doing his art. So he's really, really busy. And we'd been chasing Paul for 4 or 5 years for different projects. And he kept saying, because I'd worked with Paul in the past on the Beatles anthology, and I've interviewed him probably more times than anybody else has. And he said, I'm really keen on doing it if we can find the time. Then I was in New York City in the States, and I got a call from John McDermott, who's the producer on this film, and he said, Paul said he'll do it. I said, great, when can we do it? And he says, Monday. This was on the Saturday, right? I said, I'm in America and Paul's in the UK, right? So someone says, no, we've got to fly you back to go and do it. So I jumps on a plane, great, drives down to Paul's place, his studio, because he was recording the album, which is out now. That album, he was working on that.
New,
yeah, exactly. It's a great record, right? Is Paul still up there doing it? So he goes in there, he says, look, I'm really pushed for time. I've got Mark Ronson coming in because they produced some of the tracks on the record. And I says, okay, sis, I've got 20 minutes. But once we got talking, Paul is a big fan of Hendrix. And we got 50 minutes, and Paul's guy, John, who works with Paul, I could see him winding us up. But Paul was, I'm sure Paul would have talked about Jimmy for 3 or 4 hours. He is genuinely a fan, So I think Paul hit every base. Paul McCartney knew Jimi Hendrix, he met him. Paul, is a musician, and he played a part in Jimmy becoming a big star, because Paul McCartney was the guy who suggested that Jimmy perform at the Monterey Pop Festival in '67. So Paul was great. So he covered a lot of bases.
Yeah, that's just one of the many fun facts that came out in this film that Paul recommended Jimmy for Monterey. It was to John Phillips of Mamas and Papas, who was on the other end of the phone, right? Another thing that Paul spoke about was the pride that he felt when Jimmy played Sgt. Pepper at the Savoy there. Pepper had been out a week, and Jimmy comes out and plays the title track.
Well, I think the great thing about Jimmy was that fact, even though he loved the blues, he was open to all types of music. When he was, in 1964, 65, he would be listening to Bob Dylan. So he wasn't, he didn't think, black guys. I don't think Dylan had a massive audience of black guys, but Hendrix was a fan of Dylan as well.
Maniacal fan, right?
Yeah, as well, because, he covered All Along the Watchtower and did, a bunch of Dylan songs. So, Paul also loved Jimmy, of course, Paul loved the Beatles. Jimmy also loved the Beatles. And, Sgt. Pepper had came out, and Paul, might have given Jimmy a copy of it, or Jimmy would have gone out and bought it. And then it was actually 3 days after the album came out. It wasn't even a week. So Jimmy had obviously learned the song. And, and you see it in the documentary, he does his version, which is very different, to the Beatles version.
Yeah, a great version Jimmy did, a day tripper on the BBC sessions. Yeah. Another tip of the cap that Jimmy made, particularly during the last year or so of his touring, was playing Sunshine of Your Love.
Yeah, because Jimmy, when he played a show in the UK, it's not actually included in this film, but he did a thing called the Lulu Show, and she had a big show in the UK, and it was live. And Jimmy had been booked to play, Hey Joe, and maybe, I think it was Voodoo Child or something. But halfway through, we started playing Sunshine of Your Love, because the Cream had just, broken up, and Jimmy famously said, we're going to pay a tribute to the Cream, who had just broken up and played Sunshine of Your Love. And then I think he subsequently went on to play it at some of his shows after that. But it was a great version. It didn't sound that much like Cream's version, in the same way that when he played Sgt. Pepper, it didn't sound the same as the Beatles version, or when he did Killing Floor. He always put his own very particular stamp on the cover versions, which he did.
Seen a handful of Jimmy documentaries. I've never seen such great interview with Chaz Chandler than your film.
Well, Chaz, I knew Chaz from back in the day, and Chaz Chandler and I are both from Newcastle in the north of England. And when I was in a band, I was a singer in a band, and Chaz come along to see my band, right? Because I knew that Chaz had signed Jimmy, and he'd signed an English band called Slade, who didn't really take off in the States. And Chaz said to me, you want to give up on being in a band, Bob? You should be a producer. but I ended up being a director. But Chas was great, and Chas was, a very straight-talking northerner, and he was very much aware of the role that he'd played in making Jimmy a star, because Chas saw him playing, in Greenwich Village, brought him to the UK on the understanding that he would make Jimi Hendrix a star, and that's what Chas did, And he spoke as he found, and when things between Jimmy and Chas started getting a bit rocky, when Jimmy was doing the Electric Ladyland album, and Jimmy was wanting to expand a bit more and not just do 3 or 4 minute songs, Chas was saying, you're jamming in the studio, and Chas was into knock a song down really quickly, and Chas actually left, Chas actually left the sessions and didn't finish off the Electric Ladyland album with Jimmy, but, Chas said that just before Jimmy died, Jimmy had got in touch with Chas and said, look, I've been recording in New York, I want to bring the tapes over to London, which was where Jimmy, was at the time, and I'd like to start working with you again. And Chas said, oh, great, So I think if Jimmy hadn't died in 1970, there's a good chance that he and Chas would have started working together again. Chas sadly now is passed as well, But Chas was a great guy, and he was, you can't praise Chas Chandler enough. He was a guy that was in the Animals, who, he knew the business, but he just got sick of touring, and he wanted to manage an artist, and he wanted to find somebody who could record the song Hey Joe, the Tim Rose song, which Chas had heard, and thought, if I can find someone to record this song with in the UK, it could be a hit. And the first time he saw Hendrix playing in Greenwich Village, Hendrix came out, and the first song he played was Hey Joe. It was just synchronicity, and Chas said, you're the guy for me, or words to that, something like that. And Jimmy, he wasn't really going anywhere at the time. He had a good reputation, and as Jimmy says in the film, he loves to travel, and Chas got him a train ticket. That's when he could get the train from America to England. He got him a flight ticket, and Jimmy had a guitar, turned up in London with just a guitar, no band, and that shows the braveness of Jimi Hendrix, and also how brave Chas was to put his money where his mouth was and get Jimmy over there. And within a matter of 3 or 4 weeks, he'd formed a band. It happened really, really quickly for Hendrix in the UK, whereas in America he'd been struggling for a bunch of years, doing okay, but pretty much living, hand to mouth. And then, turns up in London, and all, people like Jeff Beck, McCartney, Eric Clapton, Pete Townsend, they all came to see this new kid on the block, right? And those guys had been listening to the blues, played by people like Howling Wolf and Elmore James, Muddy Waters, etc., who were generally older guys. And then Jimmy comes on the scene, and I think at the time he was probably 24 years old, and he's playing great blues. So it was like obvious that those guys would connect musically and, on a friendship level, because, Jimmy got to hang out with people like Clapton and Townsend, and obviously, Paul McCartney, who's in the film, and Dave Mason and Stevie Winwood. So, yeah, it was great timing.
Yeah, I love the nugget that came out about how Jimmy's first flat in London was Ringo's place, right? Because Chas was, as you say, pals with the Beatles and the Stones.
Yeah, well, Chas Chandler says in the film that I think one of the things that Jimmy said to Chas, and Chas said this, when you take me to London, can you introduce me to all these people? And he says, I'm going to introduce you to Eric Clapton, because Jimmy was aware of Clapton. Jimmy loved Eric Clapton, right? So suddenly, Chas was good to his word. And Paul McCartney says in the film that, one of the great things about Chas is that Chas knew the Beatles and the Stones. He knew those guys. And when Jimmy needed somewhere to stay, Chas could ring up Ringo and say, are you using your place at the minute? And maybe Ringo said, oh, yeah, use it. But Ringo did tell us, when we did the anthology, that Jimmy painted the flat black. He painted the walls black, and then Ringo came back, and it's like, Jimmy's painted the walls black. So I hope he got his deposit back.
For Time Warner Cable, I'm Eric Holland of WFUV.